stop for a second. They expected fear to keep you trapped behind invisible walls forever. They built rules, doubts, and whispers just to make sure you never crossed the line. But then you did the one thing nobody believed you would. You went there. Now the silence feels different. The people who laughed have stopped laughing. The ones who watched from the shadows are suddenly watching each other. They aren't scared because you became louder. They're terrified because you became unpredictable. The moment you chose courage over permission, you unleashed something they can no longer control. Their nightmare didn't begin with your arrival. It began with your awakening. They convinced you that some places were forbidden, not because they were dangerous, but because they knew what would happen if you ever discovered the truth waiting on the other side. Every warning sounded like concern. Every restriction looked like protection. Every voice telling you to stay where you were claimed it was for your own good. But fear has always been the easiest prison to build because it doesn't require walls. It only requires belief. Once a person accepts invisible limits, they begin enforcing them on themselves. They stop exploring. They stop questioning. They stop imagining a life beyond what others approve. That is how countless dreams disappear without a single fight. You probably remember moments when people laughed at your ambitions before you even had the chance to prove yourself. They spoke with confidence, pretending they already knew how your story would end. They pointed toward failure long before you ever reached the starting line. They wanted certainty because certainty keeps people comfortable. If everyone believes success belongs only to a chosen few, then nobody dares to challenge the system. The easiest way to stop someone from becoming extraordinary is to convince them that ordinary is the safest destination. Look closely at the people who constantly warned you not to take risks. Many of them never stepped outside their own comfort zones. They weren't speaking from victory. They were speaking from regret. Instead of admitting they surrendered to fear, they disguised that fear as wisdom. They passed it down like an inheritance, hoping the next generation would carry the same invisible chains they accepted years ago. Fear spreads fastest when it sounds reasonable. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to wait until tomorrow. It tells you you're not ready. It tells you someone else is more talented, more connected, more deserving. Before long, hesitation becomes your identity. Every great breakthrough begins with someone refusing to believe the limits everyone else accepted. History never remembers those who stayed safely inside invisible fences. It remembers those who walked beyond them despite uncertainty. The path always looked impossible from a distance, because impossible is simply the label people give to something they haven't witnessed yet. The moment one person succeeds, the impossible suddenly becomes achievable. That is why people resist change. They fear what your success might reveal about their own excuses. When you finally decided to move forward, nothing magical happened overnight. The sky didn't open. The road didn't become easier. Doubts still followed you. Obstacles still appeared. The difference was that you stopped treating fear like a command. You recognized it as noise instead of truth. That single shift changed everything. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear make your decisions. Once you understand that, every obstacle becomes smaller because it no longer controls your direction. The strange part is that the place everyone warned you about rarely matches the stories they told. Instead of monsters, you often find opportunity. Instead of disaster, you discover growth. Instead of destruction, you uncover abilities you never knew existed. The greatest treasure hidden beyond fear isn't money, status, or recognition. It's the realization that you were capable all along. Every challenge you overcome rewrites the story you once believed about yourself. People begin reacting differently when they notice you've crossed boundaries they never dared approach. Some become inspired because your courage reminds them of their own forgotten potential. Others become uncomfortable because your actions expose the limits they've accepted. Your progress becomes evidence that excuses were never permanent. That truth can be difficult for people to face. It's easier to criticize someone who moves forward than to admit you've been standing still. The world has always rewarded those willing to question assumptions. Every invention, every movement, every remarkable achievement started with someone refusing to accept that the current reality was the only possibility. The people who changed history weren't fearless. They simply valued possibility more than comfort. They understood that growth demands uncertainty, and certainty often comes at the cost of potential. There will always be voices insisting you're making a mistake. Some genuinely care about you. Others care more about protecting their own beliefs than your future. Learning the difference is one of life's greatest skills. Listen to advice, but never surrender your vision simply because someone else cannot see what you see. Their imagination is not the limit of your future. Their fear is not your destiny. Their hesitation is not your identity. The greatest danger was never the place they told you to avoid. The greatest danger was spending your entire life believing them without ever taking a single step to discover the truth for yourself. The moment you crossed the line, something invisible shattered. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because the illusion they spent years creating could no longer survive your actions. They relied on one simple belief, that fear would always stop you before you even tried. As long as you stayed on your side of the line, they remained powerful. They could predict your choices, influence your decisions, and quietly shape the direction of your life without ever forcing you. But the instant you stepped beyond what they expected, every assumption they had about you collapsed. People who depend on intimidation rarely expect resistance. Their confidence comes from repetition. They have watched countless others surrender before the battle even began. They mistake compliance for respect and silence for weakness. Every person who walks away confirms their belief that they cannot be challenged. That is why your decision unsettled them so deeply. You didn't defeat them with aggression. You defeated the story they had written about you long before you realized it existed. Think about how control really works. It doesn't always appear as orders or threats. Sometimes it hides inside expectations. People expect you to remain quiet because you've always been quiet. They expect you to avoid conflict because you've always chosen peace. They expect you to settle for less because you've never demanded more. Over time, those expectations become invisible chains. Everyone starts acting as though your future has already been decided. Even you begin believing the role they've assigned to you. Then one unexpected decision changes everything. The line you crossed wasn't only a physical place, it was a mental boundary. It was the point where you stopped asking whether you were allowed and started asking whether you were capable. That question transformed everything. Permission became irrelevant. Approval lost its importance. The opinions that once felt overwhelming suddenly became background noise. You realized that most barriers exist only because people collectively agree not to question them. The strongest illusion is the belief that powerful people are fearless. Look closer, and you'll often discover that their confidence depends on everyone else remaining uncertain. They appear unshakable because few people ever test them. The moment someone finally does, cracks begin to appear. Their reactions become emotional. Their certainty disappears. They become defensive because the image they carefully protected is now under pressure. Your courage forced them into unfamiliar territory, and uncertainty is uncomfortable for anyone who built authority on appearances instead of substance. Notice how quickly attitudes change when someone refuses to play the expected role. The same people who ignored you suddenly watch your every move. The ones who dismissed your potential begin questioning how they underestimated you. Those who laughed at your ambitions become strangely silent. Their silence says more than their criticism ever did. It reveals that confidence built on controlling others cannot survive when someone proves it wrong. Every challenge you accepted became evidence that limits are often exaggerated. They told you the path was impossible because impossible was easier than admitting they never attempted it themselves. They described disaster because fear is contagious. If enough people believe failure is guaranteed, very few will take the first step. That protects the illusion. It keeps the system exactly as it is. But courage has a strange effect. Once one person succeeds, everyone else begins wondering whether they were deceived all along. Your transformation didn't happen because you became stronger overnight. It happened because you stopped negotiating with doubt. Every action built confidence. Every obstacle survived weakened fear's influence. Confidence isn't something you discover before taking action. It grows because of action. That is why waiting to feel ready often becomes an endless delay. Readiness is earned through movement, not imagination. The people who depended on intimidation now face a problem they never anticipated. If one person can cross the line, others might follow. Your example threatens more than their authority. It threatens the belief system that kept everyone obedient. They understand something many people overlook. Courage spreads. Once someone witnesses fear losing its power, they begin questioning every other limit they've accepted without evidence. That is why resistance often increases after your first breakthrough. It isn't proof that you're moving in the wrong direction. It's proof that your actions have become impossible to ignore. Opposition grows whenever comfort is challenged. Those invested in the old story will defend it, because admitting they were wrong requires confronting years of unnecessary hesitation. The illusion collapsed the moment your actions became louder than their predictions. They expected another person willing to settle, another voice that would eventually grow quiet, another dream abandoned before it had the chance to breathe. Instead, they witnessed someone choosing uncertainty over comfort, truth over approval, and courage over the familiar script they believed would never be rewritten. The most dangerous version of you was never the strongest, the loudest, or the most talented. It was the version that stopped asking for permission to become who you were meant to be. For years, people believed they understood you because your actions followed a pattern they could predict. They knew what would make you hesitate. They knew which words could make you doubt yourself. They knew how far they could push before you stepped back. As long as they could anticipate your next move, they felt comfortable. Predictability gave them confidence. But the moment you decided to think differently, every strategy they relied on began to fail. Life has a strange way of rewarding those who refuse to remain the same. Many people wake up each morning repeating yesterday's habits, yesterday's fears, and yesterday's excuses. They convince themselves that consistency means staying exactly where they are. In reality, growth demands change. The person you were 5 years ago cannot carry you into the future you dream about. If your mindset never evolves, your circumstances rarely will. Every meaningful transformation begins with a decision to abandon an outdated version of yourself. The people around you often struggle when they see this change, not because they dislike success, but because they built their expectations around the old version of you. They expect familiar reactions. They expect familiar limits. They expect familiar excuses. When those disappear, confusion replaces certainty. Suddenly, they don't know how to influence you anymore. The conversations that once discouraged you lose their effect. The criticism that once echoed in your mind becomes background noise. Their old methods stop working because you're no longer operating from the same beliefs. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who refuses to be defined by the past. Every mistake that once embarrassed you becomes a lesson instead of a label. Every failure becomes information instead of identity. Every rejection becomes direction instead of defeat. That shift changes everything because it removes the greatest weapon doubt ever had against you. When failure no longer convinces you to quit, it loses the ability to control your future. Most people spend their lives searching for certainty before they take action. They want guarantees that success will come, that obstacles will disappear, and that everyone will support their decisions. But certainty rarely arrives first. Confidence is built through movement, not waiting. Every step forward teaches something impossible to learn while standing still. Experience replaces imagination. Reality replaces assumptions. Fear shrinks because knowledge grows. As your confidence develops, another transformation quietly takes place. You stop reacting emotionally to every opinion, not because criticism disappears, but because your identity becomes rooted in purpose instead of approval. You understand that people often judge what they don't understand. They criticize dreams they've never attempted. They question risks they've never taken. Their opinions reveal more about their own comfort zones than your potential. This new version of you cannot be manipulated with guilt, fear, or false expectations. You recognize emotional traps before they close around you. You notice when someone tries to keep you small by disguising limitation as concern. You understand that not every warning deserves obedience. Some warnings are simply reflections of another person's fears. Respecting someone's experience doesn't require inheriting their limitations. One of the greatest changes happens in your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of seeing the unknown as something threatening, you begin seeing it as a place where opportunity lives. Every achievement you admire once existed inside uncertainty. Every successful person once walked into situations they couldn't fully predict. The difference wasn't luck. It was the willingness to keep moving without needing every answer in advance. People become uncomfortable because they can no longer place you inside the box they created. Yesterday's version of you was easy to understand. Today's version keeps surprising them. You respond with patience when they expect anger. You remain focused when they expect distraction. You continue forward when they expect surrender. Your unpredictability doesn't come from chaos. It comes from growth. A growing person cannot be fully predicted because each lesson changes the decisions they make tomorrow. The strongest individuals aren't those who never change. They are those who adapt without losing their values. They remain kind without becoming weak. They remain determined without becoming arrogant. They remain humble without shrinking their ambitions. They understand that true strength is flexible, not rigid. Like water, it flows around obstacles, instead of wasting energy trying to destroy every barrier in its path. Eventually, people stop asking what happened to you and start asking themselves what happened to them. They wonder why you continue progressing while they remain trapped in familiar routines. The answer isn't hidden talent or perfect timing. It's the decision to evolve when comfort demanded you stay the same. You became someone impossible to predict because you stopped allowing yesterday's fears, yesterday's failures, and yesterday's opinions to determine tomorrow's possibilities. Most people believe the fear in other people's eyes comes from power, money, influence, or status. But those things are rarely the real reason. What truly unsettles people is witnessing someone who refuses to surrender to limitations they once accepted without question. Your presence becomes uncomfortable because it represents a possibility they spent years convincing themselves could never exist. It isn't about what you achieved. It's about what your journey silently proves. Every step you take becomes evidence that excuses are not permanent, and that truth is difficult for those who have built their lives around avoiding change. When you decided to move beyond the boundaries others placed around you, You unknowingly challenged something much larger than personal expectations. You challenged a mindset. You challenged habits. You challenged generations of thinking that taught people to stay safe instead of becoming extraordinary. Every system built on fear depends on people believing they are powerless. The moment one person refuses to accept that belief, cracks begin appearing where certainty once stood. That is why your actions create such powerful reactions. Some people celebrate your progress because it reminds them that their own dreams are still alive. Others become strangely defensive. They question your motives. They criticize your decisions. They search for flaws instead of lessons. It isn't because they know your future. It's because your courage forces them to confront questions they have spent years avoiding. If you can rise despite your circumstances, then perhaps the limits they accepted were never as permanent as they believed. That realization is uncomfortable because it demands responsibility. Many people prefer stories that protect their comfort. They would rather believe successful individuals were simply lucky than admit discipline played a greater role. They would rather believe extraordinary achievements belong to a chosen few than accept that consistent effort changes lives. Luck asks nothing from them. Responsibility asks everything. That is why your determination becomes a mirror. People look at your progress and begin seeing reflections of the opportunities they ignored, the risks they avoided, and the dreams they postponed. The mirror isn't cruel, it is simply honest. You don't have to announce your transformation for others to notice it. Confidence speaks through actions more clearly than words ever could. The way you handle pressure changes. The way you respond to criticism changes. The way you recover from failure changes. Instead of reacting emotionally to every obstacle, you begin treating setbacks as part of the process. That quiet resilience confuses people who expected frustration to stop you. They realize your strength doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. It depends on your decision to keep moving regardless of them. There is something powerful about becoming an example without trying to impress anyone. Influence grows naturally when people witness consistency. They notice that you continue working while others complain. They notice that you remain focused while distractions pull everyone else away. They notice that your standards stay high even when no one is watching. These small decisions seem insignificant on their own, but over time, they create a reputation that speaks louder than any explanation you could offer. Not everyone will respond positively to this change. Some people benefit from keeping others uncertain. They feel secure only when everyone around them doubts themselves. Your confidence interrupts that pattern. They can no longer rely on guilt, fear, or criticism to shape your decisions. They discover that control disappears the moment someone values purpose more than approval. Nothing is more frustrating for those who seek influence than realizing their words no longer carry the weight they once did. The remarkable thing is that your greatest impact often happens without direct conversation. Someone watches you refuse to quit after a failure and decides to try again. Another person notices your discipline and begins questioning their own excuses. Someone else witnesses your calm during difficult moments and realizes strength doesn't always need to be loud. Your actions become permission for others to believe differently about themselves. That is how courage spreads. It moves quietly from one life to another until entire communities begin thinking in ways they never imagined possible. Every meaningful transformation begins with one person choosing to reject fear as the foundation of their decisions. You cannot control how others interpret your journey. Some will misunderstand it. Some will resent it. Some will admire it from a distance. None of those reactions define your purpose. Your responsibility is simply to continue growing into the person you were always capable of becoming. In the end, what unsettles people isn't your success alone. It is the undeniable reminder that ordinary individuals can accomplish extraordinary things once they stop seeking permission, stop negotiating with fear, and start believing that the boundaries surrounding their lives were never built from unbreakable walls, but from invisible beliefs waiting for someone courageous enough to walk straight through them. Every obstacle placed in your path carried a hidden purpose, even if the people who created it never intended that outcome. They believed resistance would exhaust you. They assumed disappointment would convince you to settle. They thought rejection would make you question your worth. Instead, every barrier became another lesson, another challenge, another opportunity to become stronger than the version of yourself that first encountered it. What was designed to stop your progress slowly became the foundation beneath your success. Most people see obstacles as signs they are moving in the wrong direction. They encounter resistance and immediately assume the dream was unrealistic. They confuse difficulty with impossibility, but the greatest journeys have never been defined by comfort. They have always demanded persistence. Every meaningful achievement requires a willingness to continue when results are invisible, when support is limited, and when the outcome remains uncertain. That is the price of becoming someone extraordinary. Think about the strongest trees in a forest. They do not grow powerful because the wind leaves them alone. They grow stronger because the wind forces their roots deeper into the ground. Without resistance, those roots would remain shallow, unable to survive future storms. Human character develops in much the same way. Every challenge pushes you to discover strengths you would never uncover in an easy life. Every setback teaches patience. Every failure teaches wisdom. Every disappointment teaches resilience. These lessons cannot be borrowed from someone else's experience. They must be earned through your own journey. There was a time when criticism had the power to shake your confidence. A single negative opinion could stay in your mind for days. You questioned your abilities because you measured yourself through the expectations of others. But obstacles slowly changed that mindset. Every prediction of failure that proved wrong weakened the influence of outside voices. Every moment you survived became evidence that you were far more capable than fear wanted you to believe. One of the greatest transformations happens when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this teaching me?" That single question changes the entire experience. Problems stop looking like punishment and begin looking like preparation. Delays become opportunities to improve. Mistakes become instructions instead of permanent labels. Even painful experiences begin revealing hidden value because they shape qualities that success alone could never produce. The people who underestimated you rarely notice this transformation while it is happening. They continue expecting you to react the same way you always did. They expect frustration to defeat you. They expect rejection to silence you. They expect obstacles to convince you that your ambitions were unrealistic. What they fail to realize is that every challenge they celebrate is quietly building the version of you that will eventually surpass their expectations. Strength is rarely created during moments of victory. It is built during the silent hours when nobody is watching. It grows while you continue working after failure. It develops when you choose discipline instead of excuses. It becomes permanent every time you refuse to let temporary setbacks define permanent outcomes. These moments receive little attention from the outside world. Yet they become the reason future success appears effortless to those who never witnessed the struggle behind it. There is also a deeper truth hidden inside every obstacle. It reveals your priorities. When something becomes difficult, distractions begin falling away. You discover whether your commitment is genuine or merely convenient. Anyone can remain motivated when everything goes according to plan. Real determination appears when the plan falls apart and you decide to keep moving anyway. That decision separates those who dream from those who build. Eventually, you begin recognizing a pattern. Every obstacle that once looked impossible becomes another chapter in your story rather than the end of it. The fears that once controlled your decisions lose their authority because experience has replaced imagination. You no longer panic at every setback because you remember the countless times difficulty became growth. Confidence stops depending on perfect circumstances and begins depending on your ability to adapt. The remarkable part is that the very people who tried to slow you down often become witnesses to your transformation. They expected frustration to weaken you, but instead it sharpened your focus. They expected pressure to break your spirit, but it strengthened your resolve. They expected closed doors to end your journey, yet each closed door forced you to discover a better path. Their resistance unintentionally became your training ground. When you finally reached the place you once believed was impossible, you realized the greatest reward was never the destination itself. It was the person you became while overcoming every obstacle placed before you. The confidence you earned cannot be taken away because it was built through experience, not opinion. The resilience you developed cannot be shaken because it was forged through adversity, not comfort. Every barrier that once appeared as an ending became another step in the transformation that turned your greatest struggles into the strongest proof of who you were always capable of becoming. The greatest fear many people carry has nothing to do with your success itself. It begins the moment they realize they can no longer control the direction of your life. There was a time when your decisions depended on their approval. Their opinions could slow you down. Their criticism could make you hesitate. Their silence could fill you with doubt. They believed that influence would always remain in their hands because you had become accustomed to seeking permission before taking the next step. But the day you trusted your own judgment, everything changed. The balance of power shifted without a single argument, because true freedom begins in the mind long before it appears in your circumstances. Control often disguises itself as concern. It speaks with calm words and convincing logic. It tells you to be realistic, to lower your expectations, and to avoid unnecessary risks. At first, those suggestions sound reasonable. They appear to come from experience and wisdom, but over time, you begin to notice a pattern. Every piece of advice points towards safety instead of growth. Every warning encourages hesitation instead of courage. Every opinion quietly pushes you back toward the version of yourself that was easier to predict. That is when you understand that not every voice offering guidance is helping you move forward. Some voices simply want to keep the world exactly as they remember it. The moment you stop depending on outside validation, you become difficult to manipulate. Praise no longer distracts you, and criticism no longer defines you. You learn to accept compliments with gratitude without allowing them to become your identity. You learn to hear negative opinions without allowing them to determine your future. This emotional independence is one of the rarest forms of strength because it cannot be given or taken away by anyone else. It is built through experience, reflection, and the willingness to know yourself beyond the expectations of others. People often react unpredictably when they realize their influence is fading. Some become louder, others become distant. A few attempt to remind you of your past mistakes, hoping old failures will convince you to return to old habits. They bring up moments when you struggled because they cannot accept the person you are becoming. It is easier for them to believe that your confidence is temporary than to admit your transformation is real. But growth has a quiet certainty that doesn't require constant explanation. It simply continues moving forward, One of the most powerful changes you will ever experience is recognizing that you don't have to attend every argument you are invited into. You don't have to defend every decision or explain every dream. Some people ask questions because they genuinely want to understand. Others ask questions because they hope uncertainty will return to your mind. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Your energy becomes valuable once you stop spending it trying to convince everyone that your path deserves respect. The results will eventually speak with greater authority than your words ever could. As your confidence grows, your definition of victory begins to change. Success is no longer measured by proving people wrong. It becomes measured by proving yourself right. Instead of chasing applause, you chase progress. Instead of seeking recognition, you seek purpose. The opinions around you become background noise because your attention is fixed on the work that still needs to be done. This quiet focus makes you stronger than any moment of public praise ever could. There will always be individuals who feel uncomfortable watching someone break free from expectations. Your independence reminds them of choices they never made, opportunities they ignored, and dreams they postponed until they slowly disappeared. Rather than confronting those regrets, some people choose resentment. They criticize your confidence because it exposes their hesitation. They question your ambition because it reflects their fear. Yet none of those reactions have the power to change your direction unless you allow them to. Freedom is not the absence of obstacles. It is the refusal to let obstacles decide your identity. It is waking up each day knowing that your future belongs to your actions rather than someone else's approval. It is understanding that mistakes are part of growth instead of proof that you should quit. It is accepting responsibility for your life without blaming circumstances for every setback. That mindset creates a strength that cannot be controlled from the outside because its foundation exists within you. The most remarkable part of this transformation is that it happens quietly. There is no dramatic announcement, no sudden moment where the entire world recognizes what has changed. The difference appears in your daily choices. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop apologizing for believing in possibilities they cannot see. You stop allowing fear to negotiate every important decision. Day after day, those small choices create a life that no longer depends on permission, approval, or acceptance. The nightmare was never that you became powerful. The nightmare for those who relied on controlling your path was realizing they had lost the ability to decide where your story would go next, while you continued walking forward with a confidence that no longer belonged to them.